Just go to the next slide. Thank you. Thanks, Baden. So I think there's a bit of a risk of duplication here, but just what I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the first phase that Baden's been talking about, which is about the future warnings and the warnings uplift. And I guess the case, I mean, this is surely preaching to the converted, but the case for understanding that the social, economic and environmental cost of natural disasters is increasing. And we can see on the right a slide that was recently, some numbers that were recently cited in a Royal Commission into National Natural Hazard Disaster Arrangements in Australia, which from the Insurance Council of Australia, which just looks at the enormous cost of natural disasters in Australia. And we know that the impacts of these natural disasters can be mitigated by effective early warning systems. And it's estimated that around 10 or 12% of the total cost of a natural disaster can be offset by early warning and efficient emergency response. So the Bureau has a responsibility to warn for natural hazards. It's part of our enabling legislation. And we've been doing this, the legislation was established in 1950, and we've been doing this in the business for, 70 years. And as a consequence, some of our products and services have evolved, and that they look a bit, they're great, but they look a bit different to each other, and they could definitely be improved. It's a very complex space for us because we provide services across 11 hazards. And what we're talking about at the moment is 57 products across fire, weather, marine, thunderstorm, a whole range of things. And some of you might have heard Beth talking earlier about thunderstorm asthma, and so that's one of our newer services. And the point to make is that not all of our services are public facing. They're developed and delivered in combination with our partners. So the Future Warnings Framework is a document that we've put together to help develop the future of our services. Can you go to the next slide, Baden? So the framework, a couple of years ago, we did an audit of our services and we could identify lots of potential places to improve. But the question sort of hangs in the air, where do you want to go and what are you trying to achieve? And so that's why we worked together to put together this framework document, because it sets out the case for change, and it argues for best practice, and it provides the evidence for why we should be changing and uplifting our services. It identifies 4 goals and it outlines the principles for prioritised action. And because it's been endorsed by our organisation, it kind of gives us this sort of mandate to be working together to do something different. Can I have the next slide, Peter? So I'm just going to talk about the 4 goals and then talk a little bit about what we're doing to develop a roadmap for their implementation. So the first goal we had is to adopt the total warning system, and the Australian total warning system defines the essential elements of delivering warnings effectively within a life cycle of action before, during and after an emergency. So the Bureau, as a meteorological organisation, sits sort of mostly within the monitoring, prediction, interpretation and message construction part. But as Baden's highlighted, and lots of people, and I think the speaker earlier highlighted, actually getting that message to emergency responders and getting community response is critical actually to the effectiveness of what we do. So this total warning system helps sort of just crystallise that it's all about partnerships, and that there's a real reliance between forecasting and warning and getting that message and response from the community. The reason we really think it's important as well to think about it is that when you look at the social research about why a person responds to a warning, part of it is that they have to have an awareness that they're at risk. And we know that people, if they don't believe the risk relates to them, they don't actually necessarily recognise that they're being warned or respond. So we understand as an organisation that we need to be participating in the preparedness space by doing seasonal awareness campaigns and that sort of thing, as well as being in the post-event space where we look at how well we've done and then go through a cycle of improvement. Can you go to the next slide, Baden? So it's interesting in the context of this meeting really to talk about the total warning system, because we've also used it as a tool, and I think some people will be talking about it as a warning value chain, but we use it as a tool to analyse our services. So we did a qualitative analysis of the services with hazard owners and just sat around and talked about where did people see things could be improved. And this is an example of the message construction component of the total warning system, which has got a number of attributes. And so, for example, we could identify that we use graphics in our warnings, but we can also, with a bit of analysis, say those graphics could be much better and we could be much more effective. So in adopting the total warning system, we sort of want to use it to understand the continuum of our service, but also as a way to think about improving it and identifying areas for improvement. Thanks, Baden. So the second goal in the future warning framework is really actually about best practice warnings and what, really think about the warning message construction. And we do know that message content and style are really important factors in determining whether people take protective action. And Maletti and Sorensen from 1990 told us this. And this is also that these insights are reflected in a doctrine which is called the Public Information and Warnings Handbook, which is an Australian doctrine that's agreed by the warning community about the best way to communicate our warnings. For the Bureau, what it means when we look at what we do is essentially a reordering of our warnings to shift from talking about what the weather is as the first message to talking about who it's going to affect, where they are, what they should do, the type of the threat and what we'd like them to do. And I just need to clarify that whilst we're talking about 4 goals, in doing something about each of the goals, we're actually contributing to the achievement of some of the others, because all of the goals that we're talking about need to have, for example, a clear call to action in terms of a good warning and a 3-level warning system and an impact-based warning. Thanks, Baden. And the third goal that we're working on is to implement the new Australian warning system. And this has come about been in the making for a number of years since the fires that happened 10 years ago, when the quality of the warnings and the efficacy were examined. And there's been a process in chain to look at how can we improve our warnings. There's been a very large piece of social research behind the development of this new system, and it really looked at how well warnings were understood by people. And I guess not surprisingly, but sadly, what was really confirmed was that even with prompted awareness, between 41 and 56% of people actually recognised a warning, and not all of those people who understood that they'd previously warned had taken action in response to a warning. So we know that the current system, which is quite complex and has differences across different hazards, and in Australia's case across different jurisdictions, mean that it's not easy for people to understand what we really want them to do in the case of emergency. So a new system has been agreed by all states and territories, and the Bureau has a significant role in facilitating the adoption of this, because we need to work out frameworks that are going to build out or clarify the relationship between hazard warnings and emergency warnings. And we can also adopt elements of the new system, such as the colours and icons and scaling and call to action. So what you can see has been agreed is a nested model, which has got 3 levels of warning, 3 colours, it's got action statements and consistent colours and icons. And the idea is that by being consistent across different hazards, people will be better able to understand what they're supposed to do to respond. Thanks, Baden. And the 4th goal is to develop impact-based warnings, and I think this is something Baden's already touched on, and it really has been something that is been talked about by meteorological organisations for a long time. WMO guidelines came out in 2015, and there's been recently a very nice document released which is on the right, which the Met Office and Red Cross released, and it really does build the case for improving. Rather than talking about what the weather is, we talk about what the weather will do. There's lots of evidence to say that impact-based warnings rather than phenomena warnings are better at getting people to undertake protective action, although some more recent research builds some caveats around that and suggests that they're really, really useful when the more severe warning events are happening. When you link forecast to consequences, people are better able to translate weather into appropriate actions. And by providing information about severity, lead time and uncertainty, response is understood to be much better. So by linking warnings to actions, by providing better information about hazards and the potential location, likelihood and impact, people are much better able to respond and take protective action. Can you go to the next slide, Baden? So having had agreement about all those 4 goals, what we're working on now is the development of roadmaps for the uplift of our services, so that we're doing a hazard by hazard roadmap, and then of course there are cross-cutting projects that are going to apply to all hazards. So the roadmaps are defining a future state, a desired future state in 3 time lots, 2, 5 and 10 years. And the short term, the 2-year time frame, is really focusing on those first 2 goals, which are best practice warnings and adopting the Australian warning system. And within that time, we need to be thinking about warning simplification, and looking across the number of products we provide, whether we call them the same things, and really this is going to build the foundation for the kinds of uplift that Baden's talking about in the more 5-year time frame. In the interim, though, we also, in this 2-year period, we need to be looking at how we're going to collect impact data, how we're going to source it, how it's going to be integrated. So there's a whole period now where we're looking to improve our warning services, but build up the capacity to develop more sophisticated services into the future. The 10-year time frame is an aspirational one, just to make sure that we are looking to what the future from a technology and knowledge perspective might have. And I think that's where I might go to Baden. Thank you.